Next thing we're going to do is all the weathering, the full weathering this time, and this is all streaking grime, essentially. The idea of moisture and time, running dirt going down the sides of the ship. Have to be careful. I don't want to overdo this too much, but at least because of the gloss coat, I can rub it away if it ends up being too much. Going with 3 colors, using the rust streaks we already used, the dust effects we already used, and some dark or deep gray as well. And the dust effects, I'm trying to do the lightest because I considered doing this thing really dusty, but I thought I'm going with the idea that it already took off from the planet, so the dust would have gotten blown away. So I don't want to do too much of this. And we're just doing very lines. You can actually do it with a quick flick of the wrist. Find a good spot here that I haven't done yet already. Let's just do one right here. A little yoink, try to get it straight down. This is actually a good use for a liner brush. That's one that has like a really long tip on it, and that's really good for doing lines. So just undo these, and then we'll move into the next step. The next step, just using a ordinary dry cotton swab, and we just kind of soften the lines, blend them in a bit. You can also do this with a brush dipped with odorless thinner if you want the lines a bit sharper, because you can shape them a little bit easier with the brush, but I want these lines subtle. Again, mainly because it's a spaceship. I think if the lines are too stark, it's going to look odd. So just blending them away. Be careful not to blend too far so they disappear completely. And finish doing the saucer, then we'll do a little bit along the sides, and then the main portion I'll have to do is the nacelles. A little bit here, but this doesn't have a huge real obvious area where streaks would happen. The vertical lines and the flat panels are good places for that. We can do a little bit in here in this channel. Actually, maybe we'll do some down here, but I think that'll be it, because the angle of this is a little harder to figure out exactly how rain would fall off. So just gonna be doing this for the rest of the evening. The last major thing we have to do as far as weathering goes is all the panel lines. And this fun process, I'm using some AK landing gear wash. I thought about going for a very dark brown, but in the end I decided to go with this color. It's almost pure black, mainly just so they stand out a little bit more, because once you put on a thin layer of this, it's not going to be like pure black anyway. You're going to get some color, albeit ever slight, showing through underneath. And the previous streaking I already let dry 24 hours. We could put another coat of gloss over this, but since I'm trying to apply this carefully, we won't have to do a whole lot of rubbing on the surface, so hopefully the streaks will remain. But yeah, this is very tedious because I'm trying to do this as cleanly as possible. Because we have the gloss coat on, I just have to touch it to the recesses, and the wash just flows in where it needs to go. So in theory, the only place we have to really clean off is the spots where I'm touching the brush and we're getting a little dot. So this is going to take a good strong hour at least for me to do all of this. And then we will, I think, varnish the model and go in the final step, or the final stages, I should say. We're at the varnishing stage, and I already put the first coat down. And for the varnish, just going with the Vallejo matte acrylic, thinning it with some testers, universal thinner, and also I added one very tiny drop of buff. The buff is going to help us put like a sort of a dusty film over everything. So the matte's going to, well, matte it, and this is going to add just a little tint of color to it. When you mix this together, mix it up in a separate container, then put in your airbrush. Otherwise, this will just sink immediately to the bottom of your airbrush cup, and you'll end up spraying pure buff. But you can see we got sort of a slightly off-white color there. And also, you don't want to
spray for too much, because the more you spray, the more yellow is going to occur. If you end up, getting blotches, you don't want blotches. You want a smooth coat over the whole thing. So once we're done with this, we'll go and take off all the masking, which is not going to be the fun part. So I got all the masking off. I never told you what I used for the masking. I used a combination of tape and some latex, liquid latex. I prefer the Humbrol Maskall. Seems to work best. Normally you're not supposed to leave this stuff dry and on the model for more than a couple days. And I was worried about getting it off, but I did manage to pull it off, and it's been on for over a month, so that was good. When I pulled it off, there was a lot of bare plastic still around because there was a lot of odd shapes here. Trying to get that stuff perfectly on is a little bit difficult, so I've been going through and I cleaned up just by covering the bare plastic with a mix of dark rust and light rust. And then we already coated it. Try to remember everything I've put on camera. Now, we could be done right here, but actually I decided to go back and do a little bit more weathering. Not the best stage to be doing this, since we already pulled off all the masking on the clear window, so we can't put another coat of varnish on here. But I decided, after looking at the movie again, this thing needs a lot more weathering to it. So I'm going through with a little bit of torn scouring pad here, and just dipping it in the dark rust and the light rust, and just adding spots around the edges here and there, obviously trying to avoid the windows as best I can. And so we're going to do this, and then I think we're going to add some streaking too, but we don't want to use enamels at this point because the enamels are going to end up being too glossy, and we cannot varnish this again. So let me finish dabbing this around, and then we'll see what we can come up with for the next part. Oh, by the way, again, watching the movie, this should not be recessed here. This actually, the writing on here should look, I got stuff stuck in my finger. Should look exactly like the decals on the bottom here with the white around it. This should be the same as this here, but instead it's recessed. I had to fill that in with some very dark gray paint. So I don't know if anyone plans in the future doing aftermarket improvements for this kit, but maybe a decal for that would not be such a bad idea. So for the rest of the weathering, decided to go with enamels. I was considering using pigments, but I am just more comfortable using enamel paint. So we're still sticking with our dark and our light rust. And I got it thinned quite a bit using a lot of matte medium. Normally I like the glaze medium, but I don't want to use the glaze because we can't put a flat varnish over this because we already uncovered all the windows. So went with the matte, and right now I'm using the dark rust. And I'm just going around and adding streaks, adding a little bit more color here and there, because the streaks that I put on before are a little too faint, I realized. And this looks especially well over the areas where I already put the stippling with the sanding pad sponge. And because of the matte medium, also it slows the drying time down, so I could soften it just using a finger or a brush. So this is going to be a slow process. I'm going to just build up some colors here and there. And then once this is done with the dark rust, I'm going to go back with the light rust and do the exact same thing with that. So you can see on the sides here we're getting a lot more weathering, and I think it's more accurate to what the ship looks like. What I had before was pretty accurate to what's in the instructions, but we want to go the step further on this. I think we got most of our updated weathering all done. Just a few little things to paint, like the sensors and the back of the impulse engines. So we're going to talk about the base real quick.
The base that comes with the kits is a nice little fancy one like this with a off-center stand. Don't know why. And also there is the, oh good lord, I don't even know if I still have it because I wasn't going to use it. The little U-shaped cup that the ship sits in that I am no way going to use. Also not going to use this. I prefer simple bases because this is going to detract from the ship too much. But you can use it if you wish. So what I have instead is simple wooden base from the craft store. This is a pine base. Normally I just put a bunch of wood filler on these, sand them down, and spray them black. Taking a little bit more time this time because I want to see how smooth I can actually get this. So I've already sprayed it repeatedly with some filler primer, sanded it between coats, and then once I paint it black, I'm going to sand it again, put a couple coats of black on it, then repeat the process with polyurethane, sand that down, see if I get a real nice shiny base. One thing I'm terrible at is planning on how to mount things. Should do this before I put the ship together, but every single time I forget. It's a bad habit for mine. So I got some rod here, fairly thick. This is, what, 1/4 inch? Maybe? No, less than that. But anyway, it's pretty thick. And we got the hole in the bottom of the ship. And I bent this up to try to get in some place to support the ship. And the plan is to somehow glue this in place through my little opening I still have. And then I have to fill that cavity up a little bit to keep this rod fully in position. And I can't get my hole lined up. Well, see, it's a bit of a pain right now. So, I'm going to tack it in with glue, and then we're going to put some putty or something in there to hold the rod in place. One thing we could use is insulation foam. In the can, you spray it and it expands. That is a little risky, though, because trying to control how much it expands is an issue. If it expands too much and starts coming out of recesses or seam lines, that would be really bad. So, I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to do this yet. I need to fiddle around with a few things, but hopefully we'll have something fairly secure. That's why it's not going in. I have it backwards. There we go. And there we are. Our Franklin is finally done. It was fairly easy to build. I just had a real slow time waiting for the decals to show up. But there it is. All nice in its rusted, weathered glory. So, the issues I had with the build, as I said repeatedly in the first part, this is a pre-production model, so the issues I have may not apply to you. Of course, I had missing parts. The one thing I will point out, there is someone else out there who has a pre-production model. Sorry, I forget your name. He said that these fin pieces inside actually fit flush to here, which I have no way of seeing how that would have been possible, because you can see here, hopefully, the distance between what I painted. Let me just hit the model. You know, there's almost like, there's a good 1/4 inch there. But he said it fit. I don't know. So whatever you get, you may not need to paint the inside. You may have one of these fins fit flush. So check that. We have the issue with, pretty sure that's not going to change, that this is engraved into the kit when it actually should just be a decal that they don't give you. And also what we talked about in the first part, when you put the windows in here, trying to figure out how to mask all those. I did use latex and all that, and then touched up, afterwards with paint. Since I did a weathered version, it came out okay. And the base, you can see it's just plain black base. It's what I prefer. I did give it a nice little racing stripe of red around the side, so it matches the red on the rest of the model. So I made it a little bit fancy, and I think it stands well out to the base because I have this really nice clean black base, and that contrasts with the very dirty spaceship. And decided to leave the brass rod there, just brass rather than painting it. I'm not sure about that, but who knows? I could paint that black or something else. Maybe I'll wait a few days and decide what I'm going to do with that. It is a little wobbly. I would have liked to use a thicker brass rod, but trying to get the bends I needed to support everything was a bit difficult. There's a heck of a lot of super glue in here holding that rod in place, and then I packed that area with epoxy putty as well. So that should be fairly solid. But there is our Franklin. Now I have the tough job of trying to figure out how to take pictures of this thing because it's so damn big. And we're going to take some nice little beauty shots in just a moment. But thanks for watching. This model, actually, I just found out by the time you see this, it supposedly is going to ship from the distributors to stores. So you'll probably start seeing it in stores in a couple weeks, I'm guessing. And it's supposed to be, I think retail was just under $50. So there you go. Thank you, Moebius, for the preview kit, and see you next time. Whee!
What do you think, sir? It's pretty sweet, huh?